Live. Of course. There we go. Uh, YouTube, StreamYard, my streaming software says that I am live. I see that Danny has already chimed in with a message saying good evening. Praying hands in the cross. Good evening to you as well. Here's Candy, the wonder dog, who's all full of beans, all excited because she can smell, no doubt, the bacon treat that I have. And if you're new, anyone watching this for the first time, I know I've added a number of subscribers over the last couple of weeks. Um, Out of videos I've uploaded pre-recorded videos, what I've been doing of late is, oh, yeah, now, is what I'm doing of late is scripting out lots and posting them to Facebook and then using that as material and just talking, just putting my views out there on a pre-recorded video, not live and interactive like my live streams. And they've garnered quite a few views. One is up over 2,000, which for me is something. And so I've added, I don't know, 20, 30 subscribers. About 2, 3 weeks ago, I was stuck around 1170. Now I'm up around 12, 1,200, 15, something like that, some neighborhood. So I've added 34 people have subscribed in the last 2, 3 weeks. And they're not, if they're coming onto a live stream, they may not be used to Candy the Wonder Dog. If she doesn't show up in those videos that I upload, check it out. Wait, speak. She's in attack mode. Those bacon treats really, and he's because I noticed it operating slow. It's the long weekend, and I'm in cottage country, big camping area. And Brighton, the little town I live in, the population goes from nothing to boom. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop it. All right, I'm back live. I hope that I cured the problem of the lagging that Danny noticed. If you could let me know, are things better now than they were? Candy's been looked after, the wonder dog. I noticed I had 7, 8 people watching, and now it's down to 2. I know that the quality of my connection is not the greatest. Danny's giving me a thumbs up, what I believe to be a thumbs up. I was saying I live in Northumberland County, right near Presqu'île. I could probably walk to Presqu'île Park in half an hour, 45 minutes. It's like I can drive there in like 5 minutes. And it's a very popular camping destination. And then there are campgrounds all around here. And so I suspect what happens is that the amount of activity on the internet, the pipe is only so big. And I imagine it slows down. Internet connectivity probably goes down, especially during a long weekend like this, where this little town that has a population of in around 13, 14,000 probably doubles over the course of a long weekend during the summer months. So hopefully this is not going to be an ongoing issue for me. At any Oh man, am I lagging again? I have the date. We're May 17th. It's 9:51 p.m. now, May 17th, 2025, and wanted to kind of rehash what has gone on during the past week on the Canadian political scene and plus whatever anyone else wants to talk about. Fill up the live chat and whatever you want to throw out there. I'm more than happy to diverge and go all over the place. I don't know. I'm not going to say I have an opinion on everything, but I have an opinion on a lot of things. So, yeah, especially if it's in the realm of the Canadian political landscape. Um, During this past week, one of the things we learned is that we had something in Canada, we have something called orders in council. And in a fashion, it's kind of like Donald Trump when he signs an executive order. And for what it's worth, Donald Trump isn't the only president to sign these executive orders. So did uh, so did Joe Biden before him and Obama before that. Executive orders are nothing new, but we don't have executive orders in Canada where the prime minister just sits down and gets a big, you know, presentation folder, makes a splashy signature and shows it to the press. That's not a Canadian thing. That's more of an American thing. We have orders in council, which happen behind closed doors. And at a time such as this, when Parliament is not sitting, the next session of Parliament will not be opening until next, I believe it's Tuesday, it's the 27th of May, when Parliament will reconvene. A new parliamentary session will start, and it will start with a speech from the throne. But in the interim, the government of Canada still needs to function, and our government operates, largely speaking, on borrowed money. They don't bring in enough money to finance government operations. So what they have to do is they have to sign things like appropriation bills, and this can be done behind closed doors. They call it an order in council. But I noticed that what Mark Carney did is he kind of tore a page from the American system of these executive orders, and he was sitting at what looked to be like a boardroom table, and he signed an appropriation bill that would finance the government to the tune of about $33 billion. And, uh, hold it up for the press. It's a photo opportunity. And so it struck me that Mark Carney is very much mirroring US presidential politics. And I'm not here to criticize it one way or another. Uh, it's an effective strategy for keeping yourself at the top of the news feed, which is something Trump is very good at. And it's appearing that Canada's new prime minister is also very adept at keeping himself and the Liberal Party at the top of the news feed. Uh, Danny is writing a couple things. He writes my favorite words, Jesus is King. I want to talk about that as well, about the fact that I just finished watching yesterday a 3 hour long podcast with a guy named Andrew Schultz. I don't know how familiar my viewers will be. My audience tends to tilt older. I'm old, so old people listen to another old person. But Andrew Schultz, I will use the words young hipster comedian. A bit of a shock comedian, a bit. He's not politically correct, but he's young, he's hip, he's very popular with the younger crowd. I think he did 2 shows at Bank of Nova Scotia Place or whatever the name of the arena where the Raptors and the Leafs play, what used to be called the Air Canada Centre. And I know he held at least 1 show there, but I think it was actually 2 shows, and he sold the place out. He sells out arenas and stadiums, big name in comedy. He has a podcast called Flagrant, um, and it's very irreverent, very funny. He's not my style of comedian. He became famous in Canada for doing a show about a year after the truckers or after the trucker convoy, and he was praising the truckers because he said, my show wouldn't have happened were it not for those truckers, and you need to get them to fix your roads here in Toronto. And then he said, next year, let's do this where the Raptors play. And the next year he did. He filled the place, I think, for 2 nights in a row. Danny has heard of him and thinks he is hilarious. he trashed all over Trudeau, over Trudeau's blackface routine, talking about the fact that Trudeau had done the Arabian Nights things, the Arabian Night thing, with the full turban. It doesn't just black up his face, blacked up everything. And he did a lot of comedy on that, talking about, how Arabs are typically white in complexion, and then he goes um, full retard for like, and that's something he would say on his show. He uses terms that are not politically correct, like going full retard. Anyway, on his show, and it just dropped within the last 2, 3 days, he had a Christian apologist on the show by the name of Wesley Huff, who's, I think he's about 35 years of age, young Canadian who has a master's in biblical studies. I'm not sure exactly. I think he does ancient manuscripts and historical comparisons and things of this nature. And so he had Wes Huff on his show. And it's had 1 million+ views, which is really quite amazing. It's quite amazing to see a Christian apologist appearing in front of Andrew Schultz, and then there are I think there are 3 guys there with him who are fellow comedians. I gather, when Andrew Schultz does a show, he probably does an hour-long set and probably has a couple guys do 15, 20 minutes, half an hour before him. And so Wesley Huff went into this almost like a den of lions, if you will. Who these guys do not espouse a Christian outlook. One of the young men who was on that panel discussion, I'll call it a panel discussion, comes from a Hindu background. And it was a fascinating discussion. And Danny is likewise saying that Wes Huff, he's familiar with Wes Huff and that he has a good channel. His channel, I believe, is called Canadian Apologetics. And it's not just Wes Huff. It's there are a number of at least two other individuals who publish content. And apologetics, for those who are not familiar with the term, means to make a defense of. It's from the Greek root, and I don't even know what the Greek root is, apologesia or something like that. And we render it in English as apologetics. And what it means is to make a defense. It's not saying sorry, it's defending the Christian faith. So a Christian apologist is someone who goes out and defends the Christian faith. And if you're not aware, Wes Huff rose to prominence thanks to a quasi discussion debate with an individual by the name of Billy Carson. And Billy Carson had gained, I'd never heard of him previous to Wes Huff and him having a discussion. I never heard of Wes Huff earlier before. But then the internet kind of blew up, especially among Christian circles, when Billy Carson, known to be someone who trashes all over Christianity and had been on Rogan, he'd been on Flagrant, he'd been on PBD, he had been on all manner of podcasts and maybe on television as well, making very bombastic claims about the Christian faith. And he claimed on Rogan that no Christian would ever debate him. So they're all too afraid of me. And yet, finally, Wes Huff was able to interact with him during a podcast. Wes Huff was dialed in remotely from Toronto, and Billy Carson was at a neighbor's house, a fellow podcaster in a gated community. This Billy Carson probably earns millions of dollars from being an internet personality. There are lots of them out there. And traveled by private jet and had done very well with making these bombastic claims attacking Christianity. And Wes Huff basically took these claims that Billy Carson had been making for years, and he basically tore them to shreds. Billy Carson was famous for talking about a non-existent biblical record called the Sinai Bible. that isn't even really a thing. Someone just published a Bible to, self-publishing, put it up on Amazon. Billy Carson got a hold of this thing and started talking about the Sinai Bible and saying that this Sinai Bible makes no reference to the crucifixion or resurrection of Jesus Christ, and that it predates, he claimed, that it predated the Council of Nicaea. And he made this claim on PBD, on Joe Rogan, and these guys don't have, Joe Rogan doesn't have the educational background to question him on it. He just, really, oh, it predates the Nicaea, the Council of Nicaea. I've heard of that. So this is earlier. Oh yeah, and Billy Carson, very confident, very assured. Oh yes, there's no record in it of the resurrection or the crucifixion. That's all just a later invention after the Council of Nicaea. And then Wes Huff blew it up, because it turned out that what Billy Carson was talking about was something called Codex Sinaiticus, which dates from sometime in and around the 200s or 300s before Nicaea, but it does include all the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and it does include the crucifixion, it does include the resurrection. And then that forced Billy Carson to retract, and he started to pull out other false claims about gospels that were written in the Middle Ages, not, from first century Judea. And it was anyway. The upshoot of it all is that now Wes Huff is being interviewed. He's been on Joe Rogan. He's been on PBD. Now he's on Flagrant. I even think at one point he was interviewed by Piers Morgan, but I'm not 100% sure. I just seem to recall having seen him being interviewed by Piers Morgan. And it wouldn't surprise me if Piers Morgan had interviewed this Billy Carson. And so Billy Carson kind of fell off a cliff, and Wes Huff, his star has risen hugely. And there he was. There he is. You can watch it on here. Just look up Andrew Schultz Flagrant. I would invite you to give it a look. I see Koj Malik is here. Not sure what the emoji is. Looks like it's a kind of just a happy face greeting. I know Koj Malik is down in Florida. Danny is down in Montreal, Canada. I, of course, am in Canada, and that's why I'm going to divert, but I would encourage anyone to watch that podcast, because it's, to my mind, rehabilitating Christian faith. Has a lot of hits over the years, because of crappy Christians like me. Christians were broken, fallen, horrible creatures a lot of the time. But a lot of the time, Christians don't admit that. They hold themselves out to be paragons of virtue and, stellar moral teachers and such. And then we find out Jim Baker was sleeping around with his secretary. Jimmy Falwell was engaging prostitutes. Revi Zacharias, another famous apologist, was posthumously, after his death, found to have been sexually exploiting women who were providing massage therapy for him. And it just makes Christianity look bad. And that's just saying nothing of the sexual abuse scandals that have rocked the Roman Catholic Church, but not just the Roman Catholic Church. It's been other churches as well. And so people say, oh, this is what Christianity is. I don't want any part. And so Wesley Huff is now going out, and I find he, amongst others, is doing a great job in rehabilitating the Christian faith and pointing people back to the source, not to the fallen, broken institutions and individuals who pronounce the Christian faith, but rather to the source of the Christian faith, which is obviously Jesus Christ. Danny's writing something. Let's see what he's got here. Off topic, but I heard California will pay slave reparations to people that never were slaves, paid for by people who never owned slaves. I haven't heard anything about that. Wouldn't surprise me. Virtue signaling is all the rage. And if you're looking for a US state that most resembles Canada, California would be it. They're the most liberal state, probably the most liberal of the 50 American states, at least until Canada becomes that 51st state. And I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know if that'll ever happen, but I don't discount the possibility. Uh, I'm one of those who also says, never say never. I've been shocked many times in my life. Things that I thought would never happen, happened. But let's get back to the Canadian political landscape. So we had Mark Carney using what's called an order in council to fund the government to the tune of about $33 billion, but then pretending like it's an executive order and sitting at a boardroom type table and showing it off the same way Trump or Biden or Obama would show off a US presidential executive order. It's like different country. Mark, I know you spent a lot of time in the US. I know you helped move Brookfield's headquarters down to New York City from Toronto, but we have a different system here. And then what else has come out in the past week? We found out that during the election campaign that Mark Carney, that his government took the retaliatory tariffs that were being imposed on the Americans and effectively lowered them to darn near zero, if not zero, very close to zero, basically caving in to the American pressure to eliminate tariffs, protectionist measures that were designed to protect the Canadian economy from big bad America. Well, it looks like Carney during the election campaign basically went, okay, he bowed down and said, all right, we're taking the tariffs down to zero or close to zero. And maybe perhaps that's why when he went down to Washington and had that little meeting with Trump, maybe that's why things were so friendly. It didn't come up during the meeting. Uh, by doing it in secret during the election campaign, Carney could be ensured that Canadians wouldn't find out until after the vote had taken place, until after April 28th. And so he could appear to, elbows up, let's be all tough, but then behind closed scenes, he's bending the knee and saying, okay, yes, sir, 3 bags full, sir, we'll get rid of our tariffs. And what would have happened in the election campaign had Canadians found out that Mark Carney was, eliminating those tariffs he was campaigning on? I can't imagine that it would have helped him at all. How badly would it have hurt him? A lot of the ridings were very, very close. Some won by 1,000 votes. It was a very tight election. And that's exemplified no better than in the riding of Terrebonne, which I think is outside of Montreal. But maybe Danny, you can let me know. Terrebonne in Quebec. I don't think it's a downtown Montreal riding, but at any rate, what has happened is on the night of the election, when the results were first coming in, I believe that the Liberal was announced as being ahead and winning. They were leading in that riding. Then they did the validation of the vote. And during the validation process of the vote, then it flipped to the Bloc Québécois. Then, because it was so close, 40, 50, 60 votes, less than 0.1% of the total, because of that, that forced what is referred to as a mandatory judicial recount, where now it's basically court ordered. There has to be a recount with a judge in place observing and everyone there watching. And then during that official judicial recount, the Liberal was found to have won by one single solitary vote. I forget the vote total numbers, 11,000 whatever, somewhere in and around that range. And it was just one vote separating the Liberal candidate and the Bloc Québécois candidate. And so the seat was given to the Liberals, pushing them up to 170 from 169. However, then news came out that a woman had her ballot returned. The story is she mailed it in on April 5th, and that sometime in May it was returned to her, returned to sender, because the postal code on the envelope that had been supplied by Election Canada. Election Canada, with this mail-in ballot, provided an envelope. You don't have to fill anything out, just put your ballot in and put it in the mail. And she'd done everything she was required to do, but Elections Canada had got the postal code for their own address wrong, and so she had it returned to her, and she went public with this fact. Here's a vote for the Bloc Québécois that was not counted. And then since that time, 5 additional ballots have been found to have been not received on time. It's unknown whether it was because of the postal code or whatever, but I can't imagine that if they got the postal code wrong on one return ballot, they must have gotten it wrong on others. And so it's throwing into question the result of that entire by-election, or that election. And there are calls by the Bloc Québécois. They want a by-election. They want to redo the vote. And I'm sure there are a lot of Canadians now who would like to redo the vote now that we know that Mark Carney bowed the knee and lowered Canadian tariffs, gave in to American demands to lower the tariffs. Forget the elbows up. Mark pulled his elbows in during the election campaign and secretly lowered the tariffs on American goods from whatever they were down to basically zero. And so here we go. Let's see what Danny's writing. California is thinking of banning itself for looking like an AK-47 magazine. Never thought of that. Yeah, does kind of look like a mag. And Danny is asking if we can impeach Carney. No, we cannot. There is not an impeachment. An impeachment, for what it is worth, does not mean to remove. It's basically the equivalent of a criminal indictment. When a president is impeached, and we've seen Bill Clinton impeached, we've seen Donald Trump impeached, I believe Biden was impeached, all that means is the Congress and the Senate believe there is sufficient evidence to hold a trial, and the trial is held in the Senate. And then it comes down to a vote onto whether the president is guilty or not guilty. And so the impeachment is merely an indictment. It's an indictment. Now there's a trial that takes place in the Senate. However, Clinton was impeached, meaning they found sufficient evidence to warrant having a trial, but then he was acquitted. And then likewise, Biden, I believe, was impeached, and I know Trump was, but again, they had the votes to ensure that they were allowed to stay on as president. So we cannot impeach. We don't have that mechanism here in Canada. We don't have an impeachment mechanism. Sharunyan's writing that Canada is not for sale. I think it's a case of, it's not a matter of us being sold to the United States. It's a matter of, does Canada want to join the United States? And I think at some point in the future, that could be on the table. If our economy keeps going in the direction it's going, we're going down. It's just come out from the National Bank of Canada, not one of the big banks, but they're close. And they issued a report talking about the fact that Ireland, which has about 1/4, they're around 10 million people. They have about 1/4 our population. And in real dollar terms, their manufacturing has now surpassed Canada. So, we got a country with 1/4 of our population is now has more manufacturing taking place than Canada. And, we're at the bottom of the G7, we're at the bottom of the G20 in terms of economic growth. Our economy is just barely squeaking by. We're the worst performing country in the developed world, at least according to the OECD, not according to me. And if we keep going in this direction, right now Canada's per capita GDP, we would be on a par. If we were a U.S. state, we'd be on a par with Mississippi. And will Mark Carney be able to right the ship and get us going in the right direction, get the economy growing? Time will tell. I do have some thoughts on that, but let me get on with what's being written. So Danny is telling that writing I was talking about with the incredibly close results, with the Bloc Québécois calling for a redo, do-over. Remember that when you were a kid? Do-over. Well, he's saying it's on the far east end of Montreal Island. So he's saying it's on the island of Montreal, but at the extreme eastern end. And as I've said on this channel before, Montreal West Island, very English. Pointe-Claire, NDG, Westmount, Outremont, that's West Island, very English. And then the further east you go, it gets more and more French. So if you're at the far east end of the island of Montreal, you're in a very French area, and French areas tend to be far more sympathetic to the Parti Québécois provincially and the Bloc Québécois federally. And don't worry about spelling island wrong. Danny's saying election interference, revolt needed. I don't know if you can necessarily classify it as interference, unless it could be shown that there's an employee at Elections Canada that they intentionally had the return envelopes printed with the wrong postal code. Was it Elections Canada? Was it the printer? Was it a simple data entry error? Someone slipped a finger in typing out the return address. I think the revote, though, should be a slam dunk. Now, Danny is asking, can we remove Carney, not as citizens? We don't have a mechanism as citizens to ask, not within the legal framework that exists currently. And now, could there be some type of revolt? Could Canadians stop paying their taxes, or do another Ottawa-style convoy, demand that the government step down, that demand a new election? I guess that could happen, but ultimately, the only way that Carney's government can be defeated is in the House of Commons, either with a confidence vote or a money bill. Anytime the government proposes legislation that has spending attached, they call that any bill with spending is called a money bill. So a money bill, or just a simple vote of no confidence. If the government loses, then they fall, the government falls, and then we go to the polls. We have an election. However, with 169 or 70, whatever it ends up being, that means Carney's Liberals only need 2 or 3 more votes. If everyone is present in the legislature, if they have 100% attendance, the Liberals only need 3 more votes to pass legislation or to defeat a motion of no confidence. And to my mind, it's what you refer to as a super minority. It's a super minority government. It might as well be a majority. So we're basically stuck with them, is the way I look at it. And here's SRCX is back. He's just been out in the mountains with a couple horses. And you're here talking them with us, so you need to get a life as well. If you don't like what we're talking about, go ride the horses. What's Danny? Danny saying this is exactly why we are systematically being disarmed, because they fear the Canadian population. The gun control legislation that's being put forward, I see it as a two-sided issue. I live in an area where a lot of people go deer hunting, a lot of people go duck hunting. Hunting is a thing where I am. However, if you live in Toronto, well, so here I hear guns going off, I figure someone's out shooting a deer. If I was living in my old apartment at Pape Danforth, I lived on Cosburn Avenue in Little Greek town, Ontario, or Little Greece, Toronto. I lived between Pape and Donlands on Cosburn Avenue. I'd heard gunshots down there. No one's shooting a deer. It's two separate issues, but what they've been doing is the legislation they've been bringing in to restrict firearms quite often is attacking legitimate gun owners who are simply engaged in hunting. And um, the one point that has often been made is when you look at governments around the world that have restricted gun ownership, be it Cuba, the Soviet Union, Mao's China, what happens when the population is disarmed? Things tend not to go well historically. Julian saying something about not trusting these robots. I'm not a robot. I'm live, unscripted. But so I should check. What did I write in the description to this video that I'm doing? But help me out in the live chat, guys, with some, points about what's going on in the world right now. Just keep the discussion going, as it were. I'm anxiously waiting. This coming, but the week after, on 20th of May, we're going to see it'll be very to see what they say in that throne speech. There's another point I know I put in the description was with respect to the fact that the Carney Liberals have announced that they will not be tabling a budget. And that should be of concern to a lot of Canadians, but my guess is not many Canadians will even care. Politics is something to pay attention to during an election, and then it's put aside. It's almost like hockey fans who don't pay attention during the regular season, but then go full bore when the playoffs start. There are a lot of people who never watch a single Leaf game all year. And now that we're having game 7 tomorrow, they'll be all over it. You pay attention during the playoffs, and during the regular season, the NHL is just background noise. And now the playoffs is over. The Stanley Cup has been awarded. The Liberals won. So now people have pushed the political scene back into background noise. And so the fact that the Liberals are not tabling a budget, people are like, well, do I have to vote on this? Is this, are we having an election? Well, no, this is an election. I don't care. So what if they don't table a budget? But what a budget does is it basically gives, it's like a doctor's chart on a patient. How strong or weak is the body politic of Canada, especially with respect to our financial situation. How much are we going to be spending? How much revenue do we anticipate taking in? How much more are we going to have to borrow to make up the shortfall? This would all come out in a budget. And there are many voices out there, and I'm going to echo it. They're saying, what are the Carney Liberals trying to hide? Is Canada in such a bad state of financial affairs that they don't want to table a budget? And I don't think that's an unreasonable guess to make. It could be that things are so bad that the Carney Liberals have decided, all right, we're not going to have a budget. We'll push it off until the fall. And then rather than a budget, we'll simply introduce or we'll table a financial update. And that's what they're signaling that they're going to do. Let's see what is being written. Will we ever be able to detach ourselves as a country from the monarchy? The difficulty is changing our constitution is nigh on impossible. Going off memory, I believe what is required is 7 out of 10 provincial legislatures have to affirm any constitutional change, and that those 7 out of 10 have to represent at least 50% of the Canadian population. It's called the amending formula. And we've had 2 cases where they tried to bring in a constitutional amendment. One was called the Meech Lake Accord. The second was called the Charlottetown Accord. In both cases, they were trying to get Quebec to sign the Canadian Constitution, bring them fully into the Canadian family. And so Brian Mulroney brought in the Meech Lake Accord and the subsequent Charlottetown Accord. And initially, he had the agreement of the required 7 out of 10 representing 50% of the population. But then each provincial legislature had to ratify it. And it never got done because elections happened. Provincial legislatures changed from liberal to conservative, or conservative to liberal, or liberal to NDP. And then there weren't enough. They were unable to get them through. And so can we ever get rid of the monarchy? And it will be, I think it's nigh on impossible to affect real change. And SRCX is asking how long I've been a Christian. I profess Jesus is Lord, invited him into my heart the summer I was turning 16, so we're going back 40 plus years. And after having walked away for a long time, started coming back to faith. And I say started coming back because it's a path I'm still on around the age of 40. Let's see what Danny's writing. How much money are the Liberals going to print? The way it works is that the government issues bonds, and then those bonds are bought by the central banks, by the Bank of Canada. And the way they buy those bonds is by printing more money. And that's this famous quantitative easing. That's what it is. Quantitative easing, basically what it means, not basically, what it means is that the government of Canada issues bonds that pay interest, and then those bonds are purchased by the Central Bank of Canada, by the Bank of Canada. And in order to purchase them, what the Bank of Canada does is it prints or creates more money. I don't know how much is actually printed. I think a lot of it is simply digital in today's world, but who knows? And SRCX is being his normal pain in the rear end self. See how I do this? Let's get rid of that. I'm tired of juvenile, juvenile schoolyard behavior, which SRCX is famous for. And I notice that most people have blocked them. Yeah, doing it. It takes a lot. But it's done. He's not going to be happy. I don't like doing it. But I did it. SRCX is gone. Deep 6. Bye-bye. Anyway, but now that he's gone, I'm not going to talk about him anymore because that's not fair either. It's not fair to trash on someone who can't defend themselves. So, history. So where are we? I wanted to take a look at what I'd written here. And just cover off. We'll be uploading a new video, getting it out in a while. It's going to take a while to upload. But what did I write here in the description to this? Let's see what I've covered and what I haven't. It's taking so long for everything to load up. So pardon me while I just check on this. I see I do have a number of people watching. Please fill up the live chat. Here we go. So what I wrote was we've had 33, I talked about the appropriation bill without democratic oversight. I've talked about the fact that we're getting no budget this spring. Uh, and I've talked about the fact that the retaliatory tariffs that Mark Carney had brought in, that he's basically, during the election campaign, he removed them, took them down to zero or darn near zero. And then there's one other thing that's dominating the news lately, and that's the story of the ostriches out in British Columbia. Not sure exactly where in British Columbia, somewhere near Kelowna, I think. And uh, uh, it's quite emotional. They want, as a bird flu, these 400 ostriches need to be killed. Apparently, there was an outbreak of bird flu among this flock, but these are the 400 that survived it. And so it would seem they now have that, vaunted herd immunity. And I've heard the argument that this population, this herd of ostriches, could be something of a savior. Maybe they could be the reservoir to find a vaccine of some kind and to provide herd immunity. And there have been suggestions by some, not by me. I don't know enough about zoology and things like that, but that there are suggestions, conspiratorial suggestions, that the reason they want to cull the herd is that they don't want to be able to come up with an effective treatment for bird flu, because then they can't wipe out all the chickens and turkeys and all the birds that they want to cull. So let me see what's being written. They are safe from the communist BC government for now, from what I understand. If they did proceed and killed them all, that then they would have to be disposed in a landfill. But the landfill has now said they will not accept diseased fowl as part, as in the landfill. And so they've kind of gotten a reprieve. There's also a convoy of individuals who have either gone or are going. I don't know if they've arrived yet, where they're going to go and surround the farm and try and protect these ostriches. I don't know if I'd be inclined to want to get close to an ostrich. My understanding is those damn birds can be very aggressive and nasty and have been known to attack and maybe even kill people. But according to the owners, I watched some of the videos, and the owners talking about them as if they're pets. And Danny's saying that he would go. It's a moot point for you and me, probably, because we're 4, 5,000, 6,000 kilometers away. I'm not going to fly out or drive out to wherever it is, British Columbia, to stand in front of a bunch of ostriches. I got better things to do with my time. But at the same time, I am sympathetic, because ever since COVID came along, even before COVID, but certainly after COVID, now whenever the government comes out and says you have to do this, two words immediately come to mind, and the second of the two words is off. Oh yeah, you want me to do that? And you can something off. You should know I don't like to swear on my channel. Most will be aware of that. So is there anything else happening in the world that we should touch on? Crazy, crazy world. We got Donald Trump getting from Qatar, being gifted a Boeing, I think it's a Boeing luxury jet that could be a possible replacement for Air Force One. And it's raising all kinds of questions from his opponents. But part of the problem with Trump is no matter what he does, he gets criticized. He just signed an executive order, which they have in the US, but we don't have in Canada, even though Mark Carney likes to pretend we do, about lowering drug prices. He wants American Medicaid, Medicare. He wants Americans paying the lowest price based on what other countries are paying, because other countries in the world, like Canada, like Australia, drug costs are far lower than what they are in the US. And so he wants the prices lowered to commensurate levels. And so he signed this executive order. And during that time, during the press conference around that, he talked about equalization, and he suggested that the word equalization was a new word. I've come up with this new term, equalization. It's a great word. I just invented it. It's my word. Well, equalization is not a Donald Trump. He did not invent the word. So what do people focus on? His detractors focusing on that. Ignore the fact that he's trying to lower drug costs for Americans. Apparently, pharmaceutical companies get 70% of their revenue from Americans, and yet Americans only represent a tiny percentage of the overall population of planet Earth. And so why is it so disproportionate? And the pharmaceutical companies are complaining that they need to overcharge Americans because it funds their research and development, and that no new drugs are going to come online because they're not going to have the money to do it. Crazy world, crazy world. What's Danny saying? Culling birds, beef. Yeah. Well, I've talked about it before in London, Ontario, in and around London, Ontario. So about 2 hours west of Toronto, on the way to Windsor. London has a cricket protein processing plant. It's called Aspire Foods, ASPIRE, and that's an acronym. I don't know what it stands for. And I think it was in 2022, they made a big splash because they got financing from Government of Canada, from taxpayers, subsidized the creation of the world's biggest cricket protein processing plant in the world. And when it came out on July 1st of of the year it opened, and I think it was 2022, might have been 2023, I forget. But I read the article put out by CBC, and they were quoting a professor from the University of Guelph, a very well-known agricultural university in Canada. And this professor at Guelph was talking about the urgent need of the world, but especially the West. We need to transition off of meat and to find alternative sources of protein, because farting cows, flatulent cows, methane gas from farting cows, there's over 1 billion cows on the planet, and that needs to come down if we're going to save the planet. And so there's an urgent need for the Western diet to transition off traditional protein sources like beef and go to something better like bugs, like crickets. And so they got financing. The creator of this factory got financing from the Government of Canada and the Clinton Foundation, and they built this Aspire Foods plant. Well, now it is declared bankruptcy. It's filed for protection from its creditors. Looks like there's no demand for cricket protein. Thank goodness. Danny's going off about equalization, and that Alberta has been giving equalization payments for years. Yeah. Alberta's been subsidizing the government of Quebec. It's got to be Quebec has balanced its budget for the last 3-4 years in a row, and it's got to be vexing to Albertans to see that Alberta is basically financing the socialist government of Quebec, because Quebec is incredibly socialistic. They have $7 a day daycare. Alberta, you don't have that, and they have their own pension plan in Quebec, QPP as opposed to CPP. They have all these government plans and subsidies. Well, where does the money come from? Alberta, that doesn't have any of these programs, that is considered a have province, their money goes to Ottawa, and then more of it goes to Quebec than Alberta gets back. Why? And Albertans justifiably ask, why are we subsidizing Quebec? Anyway, yeah, cricket farm, yum. Well, it's in receivership, from what I've read. Basically, the equivalent of Chapter 11 in the United States, filing for protection from your creditors. And Danny's saying that's about $8 billion that we're paying for that. I'm guessing you mean equalization. And then Danny's saying he'll go and hunt game meat and remove their farts from nature. How about that? Well, that's a funny thing. is that Horizons Canada, which is a government agency attached directly to the Prime Minister's office, has painted a very dystopian forecast of what Canada is going to look like in the years to come, speculating that we could be looking at Canadians having to forage, go out and hunt for food, or go back to hunting and gathering in order to feed ourselves. And that you can check that out on Horizons Canada. It's a government of Canada agency. They've got some very dystopian, I've read them before, and they paint a very dim picture about people being tied into the web so much that your dream data is digitalized and is uploaded to the cloud, and then you can review it later, and then the government would be able to tap in and see, forget censoring you for what you say. Now they can look and they can see what you're dreaming about. What's Danny saying? Oh, the 8 billion is for the drug plant payment from Alberta. Okay, because Alberta pays more than they get back. Alberta is a net loser in what are referred to in Canada as equalization payments. They do not get the amount they get some of the money they send to Ottawa back, but less than what they put in. Anyway, looks like I've gone on long enough, almost an hour. Getting back to that Wes Huff thing, I'd invite you to watch that. It's incredible. It's incredible. Seeing Wes Huff. And one thing I noticed is I watched his full interview on Joe Rogan, which was done right around Christmas time. And Wes Huff appeared to me to be, I'm not going to say nervous, but excited. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm on Joe Rogan. Now seeing him on this Flagrant podcast, he's very casual, laid back. He's got his leg up, he's got a little, his foot is going, yeah. And he seemed very laid back, casual, relaxed. He seems much more comfortable with his fame than he was when he went on Joe Rogan. And on Joe Rogan, he made a couple mistakes. You're talking for 2-3 hours, and how many people witnessed Jesus's resurrection? And I forget how many it was. It was 500 or 400. It's written of in the book of Acts how many people saw it, but then he got the number wrong. And boy, he got screamed at. How could, but he's talking for 2-3 hours. And, dropping a little fact here and there is going to happen, but he looked far more comfortable with Andrew Schultz. And I think it's really significant that we're seeing so many individuals like Joe Rogan, like Andrew Schultz, and we've had some prominent conversions of late. Alice Cooper, famously, Russell Brand, Denzel Washington, people making public professions of the Christian faith, accepting Jesus as Lord. And this is something that you didn't see 10, 15, 20 years ago. And there seems to be momentum. And I'm not here to talk on the sincerity of Russell Brand or Denzel Washington. Are they really Christians? I don't know. But I do view it as positive that they're professing Christ publicly. And this is what I call a rehabilitation of the Christian faith. It's becoming hip to talk about Christ again. For the first time, probably in my lifetime, for the first time since I was a little kid, when the whole Jesus hippie movement got going. I forget what they called them Jesus freaks back in the 60s. And, that was there was that movie with Kelsey Grammer called Jesus Revolution, I think it was called, with this guy, Jonathan Rumi, who portrays Christ in the Chosen series. He was portraying a figure from that Jesus freak movement of the 60s, a guy named Frisbee, like Lonnie Frisbee, if it Danny saying that Joe Rogan is the biggest podcast in the world. Uh, and it was the first time that he had, gone into that stage. I think if he goes back on Rogan, and I think it's possible he will, I think he'll be a lot more at ease because Rogan had him on directly in the wake, within weeks, a week or two of the Billy Carson blow up. A week or two or three later, he was going on Joe Rogan. So he went from being a small, a Canadian Christian apologist with a small little footprint in the YouTube world to blowing up to hundreds of thousands of subscribers in a very short period of time. And so, I can understand him being nervous. Now I think he'd be much more comfortable. And Danny gave me the number. It was 500, not 400. But when Wes Huff was on that podcast with Joe Rogan, he got the number wrong. He didn't say 400. And, you get these numbers, circulating around in your head. I do it with years. I mean to say 2020, and I say 2002 for some reason. And what's Danny saying? Cooper has been Christian for years. Alice Cooper, yes. But now it's getting play. Now it's getting play. While he may have been a Christian for years, he wasn't getting the same exposure for it that he is now that Russell Brand and Denzel Washington, and now that Joe Rogan is inviting Christian apologists on. And of course, I think Jordan Peterson needs to be mentioned because his biblical series has opened people's eyes to the fact that the wisdom in the Bible that people have been trashing on for generations, that they're missing out, and that the body politic that is a country like Canada, that's the lifeblood of it right there. We were founded on Judeo-Christian values, and then when we divorce ourselves from this book, we're divorcing ourselves from the lifeblood that feeds a functioning society. Never going to be perfect, but just look around the world. Would you rather live in China? Would you rather live in Russia? Would you rather live in Cuba? Would you rather live in a country where expressing certain thoughts, views, and opinions risks having a knock at the door? And I think there are a lot of Canadians, sadly, maybe even 1 in 4, who welcome the prospect of an authoritarian style governance. That's what they would like, because they want to prove to themselves, to their masters, how good and obedient and compliant they can be. I got the shot, and ratting people out. Anyway. And Danny's saying maybe Holly Weird, I like that, is waking up. Some of them will. Some of them will. Years ago, and you can probably find it on here, on YouTube, I did a podcast style interview with a friend of mine down in the US, and we interviewed a guy named Jay Underwood. And you probably don't even know who the name Jay Underwood is, but this was a kid, if you know the movie Uncle Buck with John Candy and Macaulay Culkin. They would probably be the two most famous actors. It was a very young Macaulay Culkin before Home Alone. And Macaulay Culkin, John Candy were in this movie called Uncle Buck, and there was a character in it, and his name was Bug, B-U-G. John Candy famously said, "What's his last name? Spray." Anyway, Bug, that character, was played by Jay Underwood. And I did a podcast style interview with him. And my friend down in the US, he would get a lot of what I considered a lot of interesting cats. We didn't get any what I would refer to as A-listers. We're not getting Al Pacino or Robert De Niro or any big names. We got more, but they were interesting nonetheless. We even talked to two guys who had been on the old Love Boat TV show. We talked to Fred Grandy, who played Gopher, and then I forget Ted Lang, who played the character of Isaac, the bartender on that show. And we had the two of them on. And and anyway, this guy Jay Underwood, who played Bug in the movie Uncle Buck, he left Hollywood to become a pastor. and he now pastors a church in rural California somewhere. And I think there are a lot of individuals who recognize the depravity that exists in systems like Hollywood, and they're looking for answers. And maybe they are waking up. But I'm gonna end off now, an hour and 5 minutes in. Thank you for watching. Like, share, subscribe, all the above. Uh, I'm trying to settle into a rhythm, and the rhythm is going to be this: several times a week, publishing videos where I script something out, read it, my thoughts, views, opinions on particular issues. I'm doing one right now. I'm in the process of writing it up, talking about dissecting the conservative loss in the election this year. Why did it happen? I think we've had enough time now go by, so that'll be going up maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow. And then other things as they come up. Those will be videos that I script out, that I record, and then upload. But then every Wednesday night, I want to start doing a faith-based live stream talking about the Bible, TATB, hashtag TATB, talking about the Bible. I just did one on Thursday talking about Jesus and the woman caught in adultery from John's Gospel, chapter 8. And then I also, on Saturdays, I want to recap, like I'm doing right now, what happened with the week that just went by. So Saturdays will be a live stream talking about the world as it is, and we'll see who shows up, talk about whatever everyone wants to talk about. And then Wednesdays, something based on faith. And then during the course of the week, videos will be uploaded. Seems to be growing the channel, the videos I'm uploading, so I'm going to keep doing that. And I'll give Danny the last word here. He's saying, MC Hammer, can't touch this. He became a preacher, yeah, and then his career basically, he had Can't Touch This, the Super Freak by Rick James sample. And then he had Too Legit to Quit. And then he went public with his profession of faith, and he fell completely out of the consciousness. And I think that was intentional. I don't think the media machine that exists in Canada, the US, and the Western world, they want to promote guys like what's his name, Elliot, that singer who goes dressed up as Satan, and that they love promoting that stuff, but they don't like promoting Christ. And anyway, the world needs Christ. We don't need any more Satanism in this world. There's too much of it already. So God bless. I'll end it now. May the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you. And as always, may the Lord grant you peace. Sorry for this one being a little windy. Hopefully get better. I'm trying to find my way in this crowded YouTube space. Appreciate everyone who's subscribed. Appreciate all the thumbs up. And we'll talk to you. Well, look for my next video when it uploads. Might be tonight, might be tomorrow. And Denny's amen and amen. Good night, y'all. And Jesus is king, and he is. Don't be afraid to profess it. And don't be afraid to investigate it. Check out that video with Wes Huff and Andrew Schultz. I think you'll be surprised. They swear. I try not to, but they swear. And even Wes Huff talked, he engaged, no F-bombs, but Andrew Schultz talked about being a crappy person without using the word crappy and my crappiness. And Wes Huff echoed what he said. He said, well, let's talk about, we all have a degree of crappiness about us. It's a great, great, great discussion. And anyway, God bless, and we'll see you all when I see you. Good night.